Hear these words from the Gospel of John. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. I have said these things to you so that my joy may be complete in you, and your joy may be complete. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends, if you do what I command you. I do not call you servants any longer, because the servant does not know what the master is doing. But I have called you friends, because I have made known to you everything that I have heard from my Father. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and I appointed you to go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask in him in my name. I'm giving you these commands, so that you may love one another. Let us pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I'm going to tell you this story, and I'm not going to do a lot of commenting on it, because I think the story preaches itself. The year was 1943. The USS Dorchester, a ship that was once a luxury liner, had been pressed into service for World War II and refitted. On January the 22nd, the second winter of the war, it was ready to serve as a troop transport and a cargo ship, staffed by a merchant marine crew of 130. 751 soldiers came aboard and settled in the berths below, stacked 4 high, heading out into the cold North Atlantic as part of the convoy of freighters and tankers and Coast Guard cutters. 4 chaplains came aboard, all first lieutenants. George Fox, who was a Methodist, Alexander Good, who was Jewish, John Washington, who was Catholic, and Clark Poling, who was from the Reformed tradition. Father Washington was from an Irish Catholic family in Newark, New Jersey. At age 12, he miraculously recovered from a nearly fatal throat infection, and he told his sister, God must have something special for me to do in my life. Rabbi Good was a third-generation rabbi. At the age of 10 at Arlington Cemetery, he saw the World War I unknown soldier laid to rest. When the U.S. entered the war, Good left his synagogue in New York and reported for duty. Reverend Clark Poling gave up his law career in Michigan to enter seminary. When he completed his training and was ordained, he served for a while at the First Reformed Church in Schenectady, New York. When the war came, he was married, had a 2-year-old son and another child on the way. But he wrote his father and he said, don't pray for my safe return. Pray that I will have the strength to do my duty. Reverend George Fox, our Methodist, was a decorated World War I veteran, and when the war started, he'd been serving as a circuit riding preacher for several small Methodist churches. But when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, he said, I must go, because I know what these boys are going through. The moment these 4 met on board, they became instant friends. And from that time forward, they were always together. Now, this was before what we call the ecumenical movement really had begun. And so these military clergy, who really were from 4 really different traditions, were inseparable, bound by a mission to serve God and to serve their country, with the understanding that the concept of one's congregation goes way beyond church lines. Aboard the Dorchester, Captain Danielson cautiously ordered the men to sleep in their clothing and always have their life jackets close at hand. They knew that in the waters beneath them there were Nazi submarines and U-boats. During the day, they were under air cover from the U.S. base in Greenland, but during this passage, they had daily alerts and drills, and they got ready for whatever might come. And as the case during war, attendance at worship services went up. But in addition to the services, to boost morale and stave off boredom, the chaplains organized a talent show and even participated in it. Soldiers played guitar and bagpipes and piano and sing-alongs and solos. It is said that the chaplains spent most of their time doing a ministry of presence, having informal conversations, doing what they called footlocker counseling, visiting the sick. They tried to break the tension of the voyage. Chaplain Washington came upon a poker game, and a soldier at the table said, "Father, would you bless my hand?" And Washington took a peek and said, "What? Waste a blessing on a measly pair of deuces?" A few days later, a seasick soldier said to him, "Father, if you really want to do some good, get me out on deck so I can jump overboard." The priest gave him some soda crackers for his seasickness and convinced him to join in a game of cards. As officers, the chaplains knew where they were going, where most of the crew had no idea, although the rumors were getting around. One soldier tried to get the rabbi to reveal where they were going and pledged to operational security. Rabbi Good replied, "Why spoil the surprise?" However, when the Dorchester docked in St. John's, Newfoundland, everyone had guessed they were headed for Greenland. And they had to pass through what is called Torpedo Junction. As the ships journeyed north through the gale-force winds, the sonar picked up the presence of a submarine. February the 3rd. And the soldiers were in their bunks, but not very many of them were sleeping. Their fear kept them awake. At 3:58 a.m., 15 miles from where they were going, a periscope from a German U-boat caught them in their crosshairs and fired, hitting the lower midsection of the ship on the starboard side. The hit was deadly. The hit was decisive. Private First Class John Gary was just coming off guard duty and was on his way to the galley for some coffee, and he heard a thump and then felt the deck lurch. And he's like, "What's going on?" And the cook said, "I think we've been hit." The men panicked, started pouring up from the bows of the ship, stunned and disoriented. The smell of ammonia filled the air from the burst refrigerator pipes. The Dorchester began listing to the starboard side, and no one sent up a distress flare. So most of the other vessels in the convoy were unaware that anything was even wrong. The power was knocked out and the ship was unable to make radio contact with the escort ships. Two of them, the Comanche and the Escanaba, saw the flash of the explosion, and they were able to rescue 230 of the troops. But the testimony of the survivors reveals that the only order in the chaos came from the four chaplains, who immediately appeared on the sloping starboard side. And through the pandemonium, they calmly quieted the men and guided each of them to their boat stations. They opened the storage locker and began distributing life jackets. And Private William Bednar, who was floating in the oil-polluted water surrounded by debris and dead waters, close enough to the ship to hear his fellow soldiers crying and praying. But he said, "I could also hear the chaplains preaching courage." Bednar managed to get onto a life raft. He said, "The voices of the chaplains were the only thing that kept me going." The four offered prayers for the dying and encouragement for those who would live. one of the Coast Guardsmen, John Mahoney, realized that he'd forgotten his gloves and started back to his bunk, and Chaplain Good said, no, never mind, I've got 2 pairs. Take this one. Mahoney later realized that a man about to abandon ship wouldn't be carrying an extra pair of gloves. Rabbi Good had already decided that he wasn't leaving the Dorchester. Mahoney later reported, without the chaplain's gloves, my fingers would have frozen stiff and I would have never made it. I owe my life to Chaplain Good. The 4 chaplains handed out life vests until there were no more left, and then they gave their own away. They didn't call out for soldiers of their own faith groups and only give life jackets to the Methodists or the Jewish or the Catholics. But they gave it to the next one in line. One of the engineers, Grady Clark, slipped into the water and swam for a lifeboat, and he looked back at the ship and could see the chaplain standing with their arms linked, braced against the slanting of the deck, and they were praying together. No sense of panic, just words of prayer in Latin and in Hebrew and in English. Finally, about a half hour after being hit, the stern came high out of the water and the Dorchester sank into the sea. Of the 904 aboard, 605 lost their lives. But the survivors never forgot the heroism of these 4 chaplains. John Ladd, a survivor, said, "It was the finest thing I have ever seen or hope to see this side of heaven." This story of bravery and sacrifice has been around for a long, long time. And in a museum at Fort Monmouth, there's a life preserver from the Dorchester. And they say those that stand there and read this story and look at that life preserver get so emotional, more than anything else in their exhibit. Carl Sandburg once said that valor is a gift. Those having it never know for sure whether they have it or not until the test comes. For their sacrificial bravery, these 4 chaplains were posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Cross and the Purple Heart, along with the Special Congressional Medal of Heroism, minted exclusively just for these 4 men. In 1951, at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, President Truman dedicated the Chapel of the 4 Chaplains, a non-denominational sanctuary dedicated to promote interfaith cooperation and respect. Inside, there are 3 altars, Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish, in honor of our nation's respect for religious diversity and our privilege of free exercise. These 4 chaplains were also depicted in a postage stamp back in '48. But nothing that we can say or do can mean as much as what they did on that ship before it sank and as it sank. As we celebrate Memorial Day, we are reminded that freedom isn't free. We enjoy the blessing of liberty because of sacrifices people have made for our country over the years. But sometimes it's not about going into battle. Sometimes it's about willing to give your life for another. There was talk about the school shooting down in Texas this week, the Santa Fe school, and people were going crazy up in Edmond, where Kristen goes to Edmond, Santa Fe, and people didn't read the article long enough, and their phones were ringing off the wall because people thought it was happening here. But there's a story of a young man who barricaded himself against a door so that 5 or 6 other kids could get out. while the shooter was shooting through the door, because he sacrificed himself so that these others could live. Are we willing to lay down our lives for our friends? And I'm not talking about always giving up your life, but are we willing to make the sacrifices as Christ made for us? Jesus said, if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. But I love the text. Greater love has no one than this, that one would lay down his life for his friends. And I like how Paul puts it in Romans. Offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. I want to read this text one more time, this time from the Message, before I close. I have loved you the way my Father has loved me. Make yourselves at home in my love. If you keep my commands, you'll remain immediately at home in my love. That's what I have done, kept my Father's commands and made myself at home in his love. I've told you these things for a purpose, that my joy might be your joy and your joy wholly mature. This is my command. Love one another the way I loved you. This is the very best way to love. Put your life on the line for your friends. You are my friends when you do the things I command you. I am no longer calling you servants because servants don't understand what their master is thinking and planning. No, I have named you friends because I have let you in on everything I have heard from the Father. You didn't choose me, remember? I chose you and put you in the world to bear fruit, fruit that will never spoil. And as fruit bearers, whatever you ask the Father in relation to me, he gives you. But always remember the root command. Love one another. Amen.